Good evening, Professor. My name is Sam Schlimpert. I'm going to be covering Total War Rome 2. I have the Emperor Edition here, which I've also purchased the Wrath of Sparta campaign, which I'm going to examine, show some similarities, some dissimilarities as far as history is concerned. Total War Rome 2 is made by Sega. It's a game publishing company that also does assorted other historical video games such as Company of Heroes, stuff of that matter. So this is certainly not alien territory for them. And as you're about to see, I think they really have done a great job here. We do see a nice Spartan helmet in the middle. I'm actually going to examine the campaign from the side of the Spartans, of course. We have, of course, Corinth, the Boeotian League, and the Athenians as the options, but this isn't Athens at war, it's Sparta at war, of course. So here, just the scenario of the campaign. Very nice write-up here. Entirely militarized culture on the part of the Spartans. Truly a force to be reckoned with. And I think that's very accurate as far as readings and class materials have proven to us that the Spartans were absolutely a military-dominated culture. I mean, looking back to Xenophon and Plutarch on their writings on actual, at the age of 7, the rearing of males into warriors, and that they aren't focused on training merchants or politicians as much as they want fearless men and soldiers. Some modifiers here are the helots. It's very accurate because the Spartans relied on the helots for their food production, for any sort of actual hands-on manual labor in Sparta, because they wanted their Spartiate citizens, another word labeled at the bottom there, they wanted their Spartiate citizens focused on warfare. And of course, the modifier there translating to the game is the increased experience for Spartan units. And the helots, that would actually translate into this game as wealth or to income, which is, just for the sake of actually making the game playable on Sega's part. So we're going to get into the campaign here. I'm going to, they have a very nice cinematic at the beginning that really lays down the plot and then also examines the scenario. So I'm going to mute myself so that we can look at these because they're very indicative of where where Sega is actually drawing from in their portrayal of the Spartans.
Cannot allow Corinthian outrage to lead us to war. If we choose to throw away our peace with the Athenians, we are exposed to threats from across the Aegean, and our people will suffer. If the Corinthians want war, they should seek it alone.
You would see all of Greece under the heel of Athenae, cowering from them like chided slaves. We spilled blood at Potidea, but now we need allies. The might of Sparta will hold their ambition.
Your flattery is wasted. You know not what you ask.
All eyes look on Sparta, and this is what you would have them see. From birth, a Spartan is trained for one purpose. To do battle.
You are Pandora, clutching at a vessel you do not understand.
They dare think themselves your equals. None can match your skill. It is every Spartan's duty to embody the very nature of war! Strike now! I beg you!
You would plunge Greece into chaos!
Then from chaos, we will rise!
"40 years have passed since our great victories over the Persians. It should have been the start of our golden age, but instead we squabble amongst ourselves. The Hellenic League, formed to take the fight to the invaders, did not last. Suspicious of the ambitions of Athena, Sparta and many other great city-states left. They were right to be suspicious. Athena has turned the league they formed into an empire under their control. It is now less a collection of independent cities and more a series of bases for their powerful navy. In the face of Athenian hegemony, Sparta has reformed the Peloponnesian League with Corinthus and the smaller Boeotian League of Cities. As these two powerful groups face off against each other, war is brewing. Let us not forget the Persians. Their empire still stands and keeps a careful eye on developments in Greece to make sure that no single group becomes too powerful. Sparta has every right to mistrust the Athenians. Barely 10 years prior, Athena fought a war against their ally, Corinthus. Athenian arrogance has now become too great for the Spartans to bear. However, Athena's greatest strength is also their biggest, most exploitable weakness. Athena's wooden wall, the fleet that guarantees their dominance at sea, is no match for the elite hoplites of Sparta. Sparta's aim is to cripple Athena on land to prevent its navy becoming too large. Since the mines at Lavrio provide much of the city's income, and therefore its shipbuilding capabilities, their loss would be devastating. Once Lavrio has been captured, Athena itself should be the next target. It is the key to dominance over all Greeks.
Now, that was quite a bit to take in all at once. And admittedly, I did have to stop it here and there myself to actually capture all that they were putting out, because there's a lot of info as far as the background to the Peloponnesian War and actually the background to the Spartans and their attitudes. So first of all, looking at the cinematic, which I thought was very well done, does a very good job actually showing the conflict between the Corinthians and the Spartans. While you saw the very energetic and inspiring Corinthian speaker practically begging the Spartans to fight with them, because as the campaign scenario just suggested, the Corinthians and the Athenians were having their own conflicts. So the Corinthians really did have every motivation to drag the Spartans into this and actually bring the Peloponnesian League into the forefront of this war as a belligerent. And this was made evident in Thucydides' account of the history of the Peloponnesian War, that the Spartans were actually reluctant to go to war with the Athenians. That they didn't think that it was necessary for them to engage themselves in this and waste Spartan life and waste resources. So certainly a great job on Sega's part capturing the actual background of the war. And throughout that cinematic, you saw the king sitting in the background silently and stoically, because it's not necessarily the Spartan way to make those grand speeches like the Corinthians were doing, or like the Athenians obviously have done. So great job by Sega portraying that king. The cinematic also does great justice to actual Spartan warfare. You saw the portrayal of the phalanx, so soldiers in a shield wall, shoulder to shoulder, with spears opposing the enemy, between the cracks of the shields. Very well done. Nothing like we saw in 300 with the dancing, spinning Spartans, although the one Spartan, hoplite, did throw the spear in the poor other Greek soldier's throat, which was pretty out there for a Spartan representation. But the uniforms as well, very accurate with the red and the bronze, classic on the account of Xenophon of Plutarch, from what Lycurgus thought was a proper uniform for a Spartan soldier. Also, the Corinthian mentioned that the Spartan should be the embodiment of war. And that's actually accurate as far as what Lycurgus wanted for the Spartans, is that they are raised, maybe not from birth, but from the age of 7, raised to be soldiers. As true Spartans, they should be raised as soldiers. And that they should, in order to bring honor and pride to Sparta, which is what the Spartans were taught to actually value more than money, right? Because they had the Helots actually doing the physical labor and any sort of enterprising in, whatever form enterprising may have actually taken in Sparta compared to the Athenians. But absolutely, and the religious references when the Spartan or at least the older man who was reluctant to go to war. He isn't necessarily dressed exactly like a Spartan. The older man in white during the cinematic referenced, "You are Pandora holding a box you cannot understand," and this is evident to the Spartan piety towards their country and towards their religion. That of course their religion would take a central role in their discourse. So all in all, the cinematic does a great job portraying how the Spartan opinion and actually the Spartan way of life, their culture, anything from raising the children into soldiers, their actual tactics in combat, given the phalanx, and their uniforms and the actual opinion going forward into the war. Secondly, what we just watched that showed us a bit of the map around here, around Athens, around Thebes, and really just sets the physical stage for actually playing the game, was the campaign scenario. And it does a pretty good job showing the Athenians growing their empire, like we read from Thucydides, that the Athenians were considered imperial. They were expanding, and not necessarily just to keep good relations, but to have places like up north, like what we just discussed, like up north, to actually supply lumber and supply resources for building ships and building their wooden wall, as Sega called it, the Athenian navy. Here, interesting enough, I have shown Amphipolis and Thasos. Now, this actually proves that this game is centered around the first part of the Peloponnesian War. We're the year now, as you can see in the bottom right, is 432 BC. So we're not quite into the 418 and later on with Brasidas, the second stage, as I would consider, of the Peloponnesian War, where we actually have serious conflict here in Amphipolis, and of course Thucydides himself placing himself in Thasos. So it's nice to see those cities, certainly, but it is unfortunate that we don't have that. It doesn't necessarily, throughout the game, towards the end of the campaign, it doesn't necessarily expand on the second part of the war. But the leagues between Sparta and Corinth, and then the Athenians and their league, certainly accurate as far as how the war actually played out. We can see Argos here. So Corinth is colored blue, as to, so ally blue, right, as well as Thebes, and the Athenians are red. But Argos here has remained neutral, and that's absolutely accurate. That the Argives were neutral during the Persian conflict. They remain neutral through all of it. But eventually there are events in the game, a couple turns in, where the Argives actually join up with the Spartans. So accurate sequence of history there, where the Spartans will actually face a new enemy. Now, Sparta, they portrayed Spartan targets to be Lavrion, while certainly targeting Athens, and we can see up in the north, there's actually the Spartan outpost that the Spartans would use to stage a siege of Athens. But of course, a siege wouldn't do too well because the Spartans weren't too keen on building siege engines. It's not like the Spartans engineered the ballista. That was a Roman concept, certainly later on as well. So the Spartans weren't too keen on a siege, but we do have the representation here of their outposts that they did set up in the north as they marched their army up north. We can actually see a small army here, but potentially the construction of more, as you can build more buildings, ports, to at least try to fight the Athenians by sea. But targets did end up being, as I mentioned earlier, up to the north here at Thasos and Amphipolis. Real targets that the Spartans were actually able to start to cripple the Athenian naval doctrine. But going forward, and also the mention of the Persians being as like a mediator, that's not necessarily accurate from what we read from Thucydides, where the Persians actually, instead of acting to see, okay, well, who's going to control more or less land, we need to keep track of, who's the dominant power, they actually worked with the Spartans, according to Thucydides, giving them funding, helping them build ships. They were supposed to actually help with their fleet physically, but that didn't happen, unfortunately, for the Spartans at least. It didn't change the outcome as much. So, and the Spartan strategy that the game actually lays out, just as a whole, very good background. So I really liked those, the cinematics and the campaign scenarios. It does a great amount of justice to the Spartans. Moving forward here, we actually have, so there are a couple armies that we start with, and then of course Sparta, Pylos, where we saw an unfortunate defeat. This would be a strange representation of Sphacteria Island. The map isn't necessarily to scale with Greece itself. It does well enough though for the purpose of the game. Here's Messenia. So it's clearly under Spartan control here, very accurate to history. But here the leader is Archidimos, one of the kings. So he's actually a general here for this army, the Spears of Ares. So certainly an accurate portrayal of their culture that they would name an army after Ares, not only the Greek god of war, but it's a religious observance for them. Specific units here, we have Helot javelinmen. To the Spartans, the only real service in combat that the Helots would serve, as Thucydides mentioned towards the war, they used more and more Helots and perioikoi, but they would serve only as a screening, skirmishing unit for the main force, the Spartan hoplites. On the left, you can see the different statistics for the damage that they deal, for their actual performance in combat, and compared to other numbers, playing from the point of view of the Spartans, of course, we wouldn't be able to look at Athenian numbers and statistics because that would give the player an unfair advantage. But of course, we know that Athenian infantry could not match up with the Spartans face to face. But they are a fairly strong unit. They are not necessarily great in the charging bonus, which is where you can charge units into enemy battle lines, because that wasn't how the Spartans conducted themselves. They would post up, with their units, and like we saw with the phalanx, and allow their enemy to exhaust themselves on the Spartan phalanx. Along here, on our examination of the Spartans, we can actually show the faction tree and the different political characters, as I pointed out Archidimos earlier, but additionally is Brasidas, one of our generals, who's actually up here in the north, which is extremely accurate towards the Spartan strategy in defeating the Athenians. And here, looking further into the army, the Spartan hoplites actually have specific strengths and weaknesses, and in their description, which is kind of a nice addition here, is conditioned from the age of 7 for a life of campaign dedicated to full-time military training. Which is absolutely how the Spartans were raised. As I mentioned earlier, this is their sole purpose for life. So as far as how Spartans are portrayed individually as citizens, absolutely a fantastic job on the part of Sega. Very slight divergence from history, but in general, the Spartans are portrayed as they were in reality. So far, I've examined the scenario that Total War Rome 2, Wrath of Sparta campaign puts us in at the start of the Peloponnesian War. I've identified some cultural representations they make in cinematics and with different units and soldiers and generals that are actually provided to lead your armies as you actually lead them onto the battlefield, which is where I'm actually going to wrap up, is the representation of the Spartans in their formations on an actual battlefield between armies in this game. Here I've set myself up on behalf of the Spartans in the battle that I'm going to demonstrate as far as how Spartans are actually portrayed in this game. The opposing Athenians will be over here. They're concealed by the fog of war, is what this game and many other games actually refer to that too. Down here I have brought Helot javelinmen and mercenary cavalry to complement the hoplites. So the Helots certainly serving as a screening force, as to skirmish with the enemy before they actually make it to our lines. Certainly not an alien tactic for the Spartans, but where I will have my Spartans, and I'm going to set this up here in a control group, they have various formations that I can set up. Certainly plenty for formations. I'm going to do a double line sorted formation where you have your skirmishing units at the front, and it shows their arc of fire there in red. Skirmishing units at the front. Actually in front of our Spartan, these are the hoplites, actually represented here. I'll put them into, they have a hoplite wall mechanic. So tightly packed infantry, tightly packed foot infantry, large shields and spears ready to actually fight the enemy between the gaps in the shields. So accurate representation there of how the Spartans actually conducted themselves physically, and certainly mentally, as these Spartan soldiers unfortunately are actually looking around and are, I wouldn't even consider that tending to my equipment. So perhaps another dissimilarity is that these Spartans are not quite disciplined as you would see in even in United States military formation to this day, where no movement whatsoever and certainly no talking or discourse. But I'm going to go ahead, start the battle, put it on a higher speed so we can speed this along just for the sake of time, charge the units forward and see if we can find any Athenians to make short work of with our infantry. Balance of power is actually on the bottom left, so the Athenians are shown to actually have a slight advantage against the Spartans for whatever reason in this battle particularly. So we're coming into contact with the enemy now. They're emerging from the fog of war. So I'm going to set up my troops. We're going to separate cavalry and allow them to act in a way that, well, what's fortunate on the part of the Spartans, in a way that would actually benefit them in a battle. So we're going to target their screening forces and rush into formation. I've instructed my cavalry to retreat as they were engaged in just full frontal conflict with the enemy here. So, which they do not perform well in. I'm going to move my troops into range of the Athenian troops, and we'll actually see the phalanx in action here, as it is portrayed by Sega in this game here. Okay, there's a small detachment of Athenians here fighting with the Spartans, and while the wall is spread out just a little bit, they do have the essence of the formation and the tactic done well here, where the shield wall faces the enemy. Here we have, let me get a good angle. There we are. So we have Athenian troops on the right, and then spearmen with shield in hand facing the enemy and forcing them to come into their lines to actually make any sort of progress against them. So it's interesting that Sega actually includes individual soldiers here. You see the blue Athenian uniform that really does a great job. And the rest of the formation here, let's set these soldiers to skirmish so that the helots can actually serve as less of a meat shield and more of just a skirmishing element. Have them fall back. And the Spartans will go ahead and, if I can get this to work, go ahead and attack their formation. So all in all, Sega does a really fine job in depicting Spartans in the terms of Thucydides, of Plutarch, of Xenophon, of these various sources that we've used throughout the semester, as far as anything from cultural references to military strategy, and especially the campaign here. They really do justice to the Spartans and their code of being strong, fierce warriors. I mean, we see them just shields braced, charging into the enemy. So certainly a fearless element. Now there are some liberties that Sega takes as far as actual. So as we saw, the formation is kind of, spread here, kind of chaotic, which perhaps that's closer to how it may have been. It's really hard to tell without actually having been physically a part of any battles or actually having physically seen them, to say whether, what if this is what tightly packed formations meant to the Spartan. I mean, certainly there's plenty of chaos in tightly packed nature, but the shields are up. They're engaging with their spears over the top of their shield into the enemy soldiers' upper body and faces. So certainly at the end of the day, I would consider Total War Rome 2 Wrath of Sparta campaign as a fair and accurate representation of the Spartans to our knowledge and how they actually existed. Thank you very much for your patience this semester, Professor. I have thoroughly enjoyed learning about the Spartans. Even in a virtual environment, it has been actually inspiring learning about the challenges that Spartans have overcome and their strict dedication, even in the face of destruction at the hands of the Thebans, strict dedication to their morals and to their doctrine and beliefs. So this will be the conclusion of my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. It was certainly a very nice dream of mine to play a video game for in-class college credit. So have yourself a great day, and goodbye.